Overall, I thought it was pretty good, but I have to knock it down to a 7 out of 10 because it gave away the ending in the middle. Hello, interwebs! I hope you are all doing well because I am here to review the second episode of the second series of Doctor Who, or whatever number you want to end up calling it. This episode titled Lux, and this was the one I was really excited to see when I saw the trailer for this season, because that is, at least from my awareness, something completely new for Doctor Who. They may have done some animated stuff in terms of the older classic Doctor Who stuff, in terms of the actual plot of the show. I know they've done animated versions of Doctor Who for many different reasons, either to reconstruct old episodes that were lost of Doctor Who, or, I think there was a Shaka Doctor in between the 8th and 9th that came out. You know what I mean. The one that was Richard E. Grant. Anywho, but this is the first time where, animation has been part of the actual canon of the story in a Roger E. Rabbit kind of way, and I thought that was just a cool, fun idea, and I was excited to see Doctor Who run with it in a fun way, and this episode did not disappoint in the slightest. And just to forewarn everybody, I am going to kind of keep it relatively spoiler light up front, but to talk about the bulk of this episode, I am going to need to give away a little bit of what the villain's deal is right at the top here. So just be aware that I'm going to get into that in just a few seconds, but I will go full spoilers in the back half of this and kind of give a warning if I get there at that point. But before I get into all the fun villain stuff, I like that we started off this episode just a few minutes after the cold open, I should say, just a few minutes or even seconds after the end of last week's episode, with Belinda wanting to go home and the Doctor trying to figure out what's going on. And I like that Belinda sort of is trying to figure it out, trying to catch up with the Doctor. The Doctor's already going and trying to do things. And I like Belinda's just sort of catching up on things like, oh, can we go to Time Lordia? Which I thought was a funny name for the planet instead of it being Gallifrey. And I like, too, that the setup of the Doctor sort of brushing off, not talking about him being the last of the Time Lords again, that comes back up later on in the episode. Like, so many things are set up and pay off in this episode. It's a very economical script, which I do really appreciate. So I liked seeing that set up, but I also really like, and it kind of feeds into how dangerous the Doctor can be if you really look at him from that perspective, in that he kind of teases Belinda into going out of the TARDIS and having fun. Like, he knows he's kind of toying with her and getting her to do that. And, especially when it comes right off of last week's episode where she literally calls him dangerous. And we even see that people who travel with the Doctor can die, or want to travel with the Doctor can die. That was clearly reiterated, something we've always known, obviously, as Doctor Who fans, but is clearly reiterated last episode. There's a certain edge to that that's the Doctor kind of emotionally manipulating to a little degree her to go out and have fun with him, which, you can see the sinister edge to that, which I kind of like. It's not stated, it's still played as very fun and the Doctor's having a good time, but there's a little bit of an edge to it given that framing from last week that I really kind of like, how he sort of gets her into the spirit of going along with this. And then we land in 1952 Miami, and I do appreciate that we do get a few calls out to the Doctor being a black man now. And, he looks at his skin and is like, oh, 1952, better that it was at night. And the fact that we get the diner being segregated. And I really loved that line of him saying, I've toppled worlds, but sometimes I wait for the people to topple the worlds. Until then, I shine. It felt like a really beautiful way to articulate that, because it is something that the show the show is in a kind of a weird place, right? Because you get episodes like last year, like Dot and Bubble, which are ones that kind of address it head on, the racial aspects of the Doctor being a black man and sort of talking about that. But there's also an element of the show not necessarily wanting to bring too much attention in that, because it can distract from the fun that it's trying to create if you're going to talk about some of these harder racial issues. Not to say that it shouldn't. Me, I'm always here for that sort of stuff, but it's sort of this weird tightrope that the show wants to kind of walk, where it's like, we're a fun adventure show, but we also want to go to these eras in which Belinda and the Doctor would be treated with racism, both systemically and individually. So I like that we get acknowledgments here, but it's not necessarily the front focus of it. That being said, and this is skipping ahead a little bit, but it's relevant to this, the sequence where we have a cop coming in I'm pointing a gun at Belinda and the Doctor. I mean, it's never not a charged image. It's always been a charged image. But even so, given the world right now, it is a very charged image. And, it's just one of those things where it's like, it's not for me necessarily to judge that, but it's one of those like, it's an interesting image to kind of play off lightly in sort of the fun of like, oh, look, it's a continuity error. You're wearing an NYPD uniform for an image that is very charged. Again, not necessarily for me to judge, but it's just something that sort of, I was like, interesting way to sort of play with that. But in any case, it is a good way for the show to acknowledge right up front that aspect of this without going too far into it, and sort of stay focused on what it wants to stay focused on. So I like that. But again, there's others that can sort of give a better critique from their perspective than I necessarily can. But it was one that I enjoyed at least acknowledging. The rest of this mystery, I love, again, the Doctor drawing Belinda into this. He's like, well, we can go explore the cinema. Very Doctor, like, I noticed we can do this one thing, but I noticed something weird out of the corner of my eye, and we're going to get drawn to this adventure, and he sort of goads Belinda into coming along with him. And then we go into the cinema, and we meet Mr. Ring-a-Ding, who is fantastic. So I kind of guessed this. I think most people guessed this, that Mr. Ring-a-Ding was going to be yet another of the, and here's the spoiler, by the way, spoiler warning, one of the pantheon, kind of similar to, and they call it out here, like Sutek, Maestro, and the Toymaker. And so we get another one here. And I like that aspect of this era of Doctor Who, the sort of magical harbinger. When's the next pantheon character going to come up? I think it's kind of a fun setup. That being said, this episode, while I did really enjoy it, so I'm just saying that right up front, it is very structurally similar to last year's Maestro, the episode was titled The Devil's Cord. Maestro was the villain of that episode. Structurally, it's very similar. It's like we end up in a period piece. We sort of deal with something specific, then we sort of get sidetracked by the Pantheon character instead of dealing with the Beatles like we were in The Devil's Cord. Here, I actually think structurally it works a lot better. The last year's episode with The Devil's Cord, while I loved Maestro, and I think Maestro was probably my favorite of the Pantheon so far, even more so than Lux. Like, I adored Maestro a lot. She was just so much freaking fun. That being said, it did sort of feel like a tangent where it's like, oh, we're going to deal with this Beatles stuff, and then all of a sudden we're dealing with Maestro, and the Beatles come back a little bit at the end, but they just sort of felt tangential. So it felt like the structure of last year's version of this was a little bit less solidified, whereas here it's like everything feels like it's all very much funneling into this story, which I appreciate that structurally. And sort of just to reiterate, I like Lux a lot. I love that there's like a fun edge to him, but then it gets sinister at certain moments that I really, really enjoyed. I always love those moments where like something seemingly innocuous turns sinister and the Doctor recognizes it and gets kind of scary. So I like that. I don't think Lux at any point sort of, again, hits the height of Maestro for me, but it's certainly probably my second favorite. Again, no shade at the Toymaker, Sutek and whatever. But I love Neil Patrick Harris. I loved the Toymaker, but I think Lux is really solid as well. So just had fun with him and his sort of playfulness. But I also really liked that Lux was not necessarily overtly evil. With Maestro, even the Toymaker, and definitely Sutek, they were kind of like out and out just villainous characters, like out to do villainous deeds. You could argue the Toymaker maybe less so, but there was still that always the consistent sinister edge with him. With Lux, while there's still sinister edge to him, and he's certainly harming people by locking them in the film, we also see that he seems to have some heart to him. He seems to, like when we see Mr. Pye, I believe is his name, the caretaker, dancing with his wife, Lux seems to be enjoying it. And and seeming like to have like emotions about that. And I actually thought that was kind of interesting to see a little bit of a nicer shade of a character like this Pantheon. Also on that note, I liked also the idea that was sort of reiterated a few times here of people who exist in film kind of can be brought to life. We saw it with Mr. Pye, bringing his wife back to life and sort of like being able to hold on to this essence of her in some way through film that Lux was sort of even more drawing out through his magical powers. But it also is acknowledged in an interesting way with the reference to Rock Hudson at the beginning of the episode, where for those of you who don't know, Rock Hudson was a famous Hollywood performer who was gay and died from AIDS. And I call that out at the top of this, and that's an interesting thing too. Of like, oh look, this famous actor, especially knowing Russell T Davies being a very like out gay man, and very much has written a lot of queer media. He knows this history of like how queer people sort of see ourselves in history, and sometimes we get erased, and it's nice to be able to get acknowledged and see those people like have some they're burned into history in some way, and we can go back and see them in some way, and so there's a bit of like sense of like, oh, we have these people, even though they've died and moved on, we can have them. And it's interesting. It's an interesting thing because it's a similar idea. I think if anyone watched the recent Black Mirror season, I won't spoil too much for you, but there's an episode in that season, the new one, Hotel Reverie, that deals very much with similar ideas, much more directly and much more overtly than this episode of Doctor Who does, but it is an idea that came up at a similar time. So I just found that to be an interesting acknowledgement, especially through a queer lens, which it also does in the Black Mirror episode. And at a time where we're seeing queer history getting actively erased and removed, and trying to force people to go in the closet and things like that, it is nice to be able to remember that we have been here throughout both recent history and throughout history, eternal. So just seeing those things acknowledged, especially within film history through things like Black Mirror, Doctor Who, I enjoyed quite a lot. But then this brings us to the Doctor and Belinda getting sucked into the actual screen. And I loved Lux calling the projectors his girls. Thought that was great. And yeah, I think the rest of the stuff of like the meta jokes that we got were overall very fun. I think the Doctor gaining more depth by being emotionally open, Belinda as well, and that the jokes like, we've been framed. I'm like, I am all here for all of these puns. You know me, I love a good pun. So like, great, I'm here for the dumb puns. The like playing with the frame. It's stuff that I've seen before, but it's a fun use of the meta commentary. Them breaking out, and the Doctor again figuring out the fact that the cop wasn't really a cop because the continuity error was cute. But then this brings us to the sort of big one that we got, which was them going through the fourth wall, through the screen, and meeting some Doctor Who fans, which, again, I thought was cute. I did worry right at the top of it being like, it feels like it's there's an element of it like where I can brush it off. It's like, oh, it was a fourth wall break joke bit. But there was a part of me that was like, this feels like it might go too far for the Doctor to know that he is a character in a show that's called Doctor Who, and just have him carry that knowledge for the rest of the series, that presumably, unless someone gets mind erased from him. So I was a little bit worried about him having that knowledge. It feels like it might be a jump the shark moment that might undercut any tension for the Doctor going forward. I mean, not that it literally would, but it'd just be a weird thing that the Doctor just sort of knows he's a fictional character going forward. So I liked that the twist was that this was also just another game that Lux was playing, and even kind of a degree playing it on us, because we were like, is the Doctor learning this? And so I appreciated that it was a fourth wall break trap rather than it being literally the Doctor stepping into our world in some way, shape, or form. And again, it also played into the nature of these fans felt very stereotypical in terms of fans. Like, you have the ones like, oh, Doctor Who's jumped the shark character, and the ones who were like so excited. I did love that they all love Blink, which is, correct. That is the correct answer. I probably would also put Blink up top. And I love that the Doctor mentions only ones from this incarnation of the Doctor recently, like the landmine one and stuff like that. Only ones that he has dealt with is this incarnation of the Doctor. So he's a bit like self-centered in that way, which I kind of thought was a little bit subtly funny. I like that they also figured out that they were not real themselves, because like, oh, we love the Doctor, we can read the show, we know what's going to happen. So I liked that. I do think that the show was playing it up a little bit too much. I think the show kind of wanted us to feel, us watching, that like, oh, look, we see ourselves in the fans, and isn't it really wonderful, and they're going to die for him, and you, the fans of watching the show, you're part of this too, you should feel emotional. And we get Murphy Gold's music just really playing it up, and I think it was, I especially think the music was way overdoing it and laying it on way too thick for characters that, like, yes, I get what the show is doing. It's trying to be a nice call out to the fans and a little love letter to the fans, and I do appreciate that to a degree. But it's like, it felt like it was trying a little bit too hard for characters that, beyond the symbolic nature of them, were quite literally, by their own definitions, two-dimensional characters. Though I did like, they said like, oh, we don't even get a last name. They do get surnames in the end credits of the episode, so I thought that was very cute and very sweet. So I just think like let me put it this way: the writing of it had no problem with it. The acting, like the beat wasn't bad. It felt like the show, like through the music and through how long it lingered on it, was giving a little bit more weight than I think it had appropriately earned, just because of the kind of self-congratulatory fan pat on the back that it was doing. But you know, it just went a little bit too far. It's like, you're at an 11, want you at a 7. I think that was probably the best way to explain it. But we do get out, and I love the way that they beat the doctor. It's this sort of like, the doctor's figured out like what does he never do, step outside. They get him, and he becomes one with everything. And the acknowledgement of him using bi-generation energy, my first thought when I watched it was like, this feels like he just burned his hand. A little bit of a waste of the use of bi-generation energy, because you said, I've been waiting to say this. I'm like, dude, just get your hand healed. Don't waste the bi-generation energy. You may need that later. Obviously, the episode was setting that up so that the Lux would want to steal the Doctor's energy to sort of build those stakes. I get it. I get what you're doing. It's the setup payoff sort of element going on there. Like, oh, bi-generation energy, he's going to steal it. Need a reminder so the audience will know and the stakes are established within the episode. I see the function of it, and I think because I see the function of it, especially since it feels a little bit like, why would the Doctor waste that energy at this moment for just a burn on his hand? It feels like it was like, I see the hand of the author a little bit too much. That being said, I did love Belinda just going right into nurse mode and being like, let me look at this, let me help you with this. Like, that spoke well to Belinda, and I like that aspect of her character being shown. So that worked out well, but the hand of the author and element of that was a bit much. But the rest of it, I thought was great. We ended the episode strong with the Doctor saving the day. The Lux becomes one with the universe, and I like that to a degree because Lux is probably the least villain. It's not to say that he isn't a villain. He did try to kill or trap 15 people in film, so it's not completely unvillainous, but certainly I think the least villainous of any of the pantheon we've seen so far. He didn't actually actively kill people. He seemed to have some level of a heart, and more playful to a degree too than sinister at times. And I feel like while he gets beaten, he is also the one that has got probably the most positive ending of any of the pantheon that we've seen so far. So I do at least appreciate that we get that element of it. And then, end of the day, everyone's saved, everything's great. The Doctor goes off on another adventure, and we get an interesting Mrs. Flood call out here. And here's something that I missed. So I'm not going to try and speculate too much on Mrs. Flood. She's clearly something, whether she be a member of the Pantheon or something else. I know there's a billion and one theories out there. What is interesting, and I didn't clock this last episode, others may have, they probably did, but Mrs. Flood said, the show is over May 24th. And that felt like a call out not just to, the fact that Belinda can't get back to May 24th when she was pulled out, but I looked it up. May 24th is when the 7th episode, so not the final episode, but the penultimate episode of this season is actually airing. And so there may be a meta commentary here about the show potentially being canceled, like Doctor Who being canceled and things like that. There's been a lot of rumors going on about that around the show. So I'm curious to see if that might be the show it's already done like a meta commentary with fans. I wonder if it's going to be even doing more meta commentary, considering Mrs. Flood can literally break the fourth wall. So she might be breaking the fourth wall and talking about Doctor Who being canceled. And so that might be a big play on Russell T Davies' part. I mean, this is me getting conspiratorial, but Russell T Davies, if you didn't see, he did like an interview recently where he talked about like, the Doctor Who is okay if Doctor Who goes on pause. And I'm like,
I kind of know that the Doctor's reached the status of like Robin Hood. Sometimes there might be a pause, and during that pause, the viewers of Newsround Now will grow up a few years and start writing stories, and they'll bring it back. So I have absolute faith that will survive, because I'm living proof of it. And that's what happens to good ideas. No good idea ever dies.
He seems to be setting up fans to be disappointed. Like, set up fans to be like, all right, the show's like paused for a little while, it's okay. Like, he seems to be setting people up for that expectation, which feels weird for a showrunner to do. Usually showrunners like, yeah, we're gonna be great, I have many more ideas. That's something you usually don't typically do as a showrunner. And so I'm wondering if there's a bit of a meta game on Russell's part. He's the kind, like most creators I wouldn't necessarily say would do something like that. Russell's the kind of creator to maybe do something like that. He likes to fuck with people and lie to people outside of the actual story of the show. So who knows? We'll see. But that did seem like an express call out to Mrs. Flood, pointing at the show itself, especially since May 24th is an actual episode and is the air date of the first episode of a two-parter of Doctor Who for the final 2 episodes of the season. So I'm sure that is going to play into the story in some way when we get to that episode. Curious what it's going to be and how meta it's going to get, but I think there's going to be some level of that in play on that date. So curious to see where that's going to go. Not going to speculate too much more beyond that, but was interesting to me. And again, I liked that the end of the episode, we get the fans still exist, and they did get surnames in the credits, which was cute and nice and fun. I enjoyed that. So yeah, that was my thoughts on this episode of Doctor Who Lux. I thought it was a very solid one, and certainly while it had a lot of parallels to The Devil's Cord, I thought this was structurally a really fun one, and got to have some fun with some, I didn't even mention, like, it's very, early Disney Fleischer Studio cartoons, with the look of Mr. Ring-a-Ding. So I enjoyed that little call out to Hollywood film history. So that was fun. Great. Loved the episode. What did you think, though? I'd love to hear all your thoughts down below. But beyond all that, I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.